When the police car pulled up to the small house on the edge of town, no one expected the woman who emerged to be the same child who had disappeared 2 decades earlier. Her hair was longer now, her eyes carried shadows of undisclosed years. But her face, those who remembered her as a little girl, recognized it instantly. Time had changed her, but it had not erased her. 2 decades earlier, she was just 8 years old when she disappeared one summer afternoon. The village searched for her for weeks, scouring the riverbanks, the forests, every abandoned barn. Posters bearing her face, smiling toothless, with a red ribbon in her hair, were tacked to trees and bus stops. Parents hugged their children tighter. Neighbors locked their doors earlier at night. As the months turned into years, hope turned to grief. Her family clung to fragments, a bicycle left in the yard, school notebooks still on a shelf, a photograph beside the bed. But now, 20 years later, she was there alive. And with her return came not only relief, but questions no one dared to voice so quickly. Where had she been? Who had taken her? And how had she survived all this time? When the police car turned the cobblestone corner and parked in front of the low-walled house, no one believed that the woman who got out, hair tied in a hasty ponytail, a simple coat, a gaze that conveyed dark rooms, was the same girl who disappeared on a summer afternoon 2 decades earlier. The news arrived before the siren. Someone saw the delivery and called a neighbor who called the other, who sent a message to the group on the street. The doors opened like lilies. From the gate of House 41, Lucia emerged with trembling hands, her eyes searching the past, searching in that adult face for the features of her 8-year-old daughter with the red bow in her hair. And I found it, not as one finds an old photograph, but as one corrects a smell that never quite went away. There was no scream. There was no fainting. There was a thick silence made of accumulated hours before the two touched. The woman took a shallow breath, as if testing her own body, and rested her forehead on her mother's shoulder. Lucia closed her eyes. The police officer accompanying them, Raoul, lowered his gaze and pretended to carefully check something in his notebook. 20 years earlier that afternoon, the girl, then named Julia, had gone out to take a notebook to her classmate's house. It was close. She never arrived. They searched for days on the train tracks, the riverbanks, and vacant lots overgrown with crabgrass. Volunteers formed lines and swept every subway station. The red ribbon was found in the corner drain, covered in dust like a misplaced period. They pasted posters with photos on lampposts, bakeries, and social media profiles that were still in their infancy. Her father, José, aged 10 years in 6 months. Lucia slept with the window open, in case. She came back at night. A year later, the room stood frozen in time, smelling of stored soap, albums stacked, the bicycle leaning in a corner with a flat tire. 2 years later, Marina, the older sister, learned to say, "My name is Marina," without adding, "and I have a younger sister." In the 3rd year, the house needed painting. The bedroom wall was kept with the height markings scratched in pencil. In the 4th year, José died of a silent heart attack, sitting in the kitchen, staring at the door. No one said it was from sadness, not in so many words, but the neighborhood understood. The woman now at the gate was officially named Anna on her temporary documents issued at a shelter. One cold night in another city, she walked into a gas station and asked to use the restroom. The attendant saw her hand tremble as she lit a cigarette with the unlit lighter. "Offer him coffee." She asked bluntly if there was a police station around here that wasn't cruel. The phrase, so inviting, stuck in his head. Minutes later, a patrol car drove her to a room with yellow lighting and 2 metal chairs. She walked around a few pieces. Not names, not addresses, pieces. She said she'd changed cities 3 times, her last name twice, that she'd learned to shop on Tuesdays because that was the day no one looked anyone in the eye, that she'd lost track of facts. That when she saw an old news story on a faded poster on a church wall, missing children, her body reacted like someone hearing their own name in a crowd. She pointed to a small, out-of-focus photo. "I think that was me," she said. The girl in the photo had slightly protruding ears, just like hers. The social worker, Carla, ordered a DNA test. It came back compatible with Lucia. Raoul, the police officer, didn't make a speech. He simply said, "Let's take it slow." And they did. First they called Lucia, then Marina. The house was wiped clean of memories before their arrival, not to hide, but to protect. Lucia took the photos from the low bookshelf and put them in an album. She folded the blanket from the unused bedroom and left it on the chair. No one touched the bicycle. It was a kind of witness. At the reunion, the neighborhood breathed again. A neighbor brought sweet bread. The man from the grocery store, who always left an apple in Lucia's bag on account, cried along. The church bell rang at 6. The dog at house 37, who barked at everything, lay down. That evening, there was a bowl of soup, the same as before. Chicken broth with carrots and parsley. The woman sniffed the soup as if leafing through a forgotten book. "Come slowly." Lucia wanted to touch her hand the whole time, but learned to stay quiet when she felt her daughter's body resist reflexively. The word daughter caught in her throat, but it came out. It came out without a question mark at the end. The questions arose inevitably, but not in the first week. Raoul asked the press to wait. Some journalists, less hasty, understood. Others didn't. "Do you know where she's been? Did she confirm she was kidnapped? Who was the man?" The headlines demanded questions, maps with arrows, schedules, a narrative that fit into 40 seconds. Reality delivered pauses, gaps, cuts. Carla repeated, "The body counts in its own time." And she taught Lucia and Marina to see the signs. The look that darted away, the breath that stopped, the shoulder that rose like a shield. If she says, "I don't remember," believe me, remembering isn't an obligation. Being alive is already too much work. In the neighborhood, versions sprouted, like grass after rain. She was taken by a net. She ran away. She was exchanged for money. She lived in a rich people's house. She worked in a circus. She became a different person. Some were pious fantasies, others were cruel. Lucia closed her ears to the street. She kept her ears open only to the living room, where the woman, sometimes Anna, sometimes Julia, sat on the sofa and stared into space as if waiting for the rest of her life to arrive. Marina, more practical, put a handwritten sign on the door. "Don't knock." It worked for 2 days. Over time, memories began to emerge like slowly developing photographs. No perfect chronology, a smell of disinfectant, a high window with a bar, 4 steps from the mattress to the sink, a green towel, a woman's voice saying, "Hurry up," a radio playing soccer, a white car, a faucet whistling, a notebook with a blue cover where she wrote meaningless words that only she would understand. Later, in some memories, there were other faces, but blurred as if the camera were shaking. Carla insisted that the body stores things in its own way, sometimes as an archive, sometimes as noise. "You don't need to make sense now," she would say. "Breathing is enough." Raoul opened a clean investigation without spectacle. There was no hero. There was method. He returned to old testimonies, which at the time were loose ends. A neighbor who moved to another neighborhood the week of the disappearance. A white van without a sticker that always stopped at the bakery on Tuesdays. The man from the tire shop who years later commented at the bar, "Back then, there was a quiet girl who always passed by with the same woman." The bar closed, the man moved, the bakery owner died. Time was a map with streets that no longer existed. Still, some arrows aligned. During a visit to the old room, the woman touched the wall with the height markings. The grey pencil read, Julia, 8 years old, 1.28 mates. Beside it, Lucia's handwriting read, "On her way to 9." The woman leaned, her forehead against the cold wall, and remained. Lucia took 2 steps out of respect. Then the woman asked, "Did he see those markings?" Lucia understood without needing a clear context. She simply said, "No, no one has been here since that day." The woman nodded, as if returning a weight to its rightful place. There were setbacks. One night, a motorcycle noise made the woman cower behind the sofa, her eyes darting to the window as if checking for escape routes. Another night, a boom of fireworks elicited a scream that didn't seem to be coming from there. Carla taught the grounding routine, saying out loud what she saw: a brown table, a beige curtain, a clock, a blue plate, until her body remembered it was safe. Marina participated, a bit skeptical at first. Then she became an expert. Lucia learned to cook by describing ingredients, as if the food were a map back home. Onion, garlic, bay leaf, salt. Listen to the sound of the sauté, smell the smell. Gradually, other people who had experienced similar situations appeared. A woman from another neighborhood knocked on the door with a cake and said, "I'm back after 10 years. You don't have to listen to me. I just brought cake." The woman demonstrated, for the first time, effortlessly. They ate in silence. The cake tasted like neighborhood. The church proposed a Thanksgiving mission. Lucia thanked them, but asked for it to be simple. No filming, no tearful script. The priest understood. The bell rang. It wasn't heroic. It was normal. People sang softly. The woman appeared in the last pew near the door. At the end, she didn't want lines, hugs from strangers, or questions. She wanted to go home, take off her shoes, lie on the couch, and listen to the rain. Lucia sat on the floor, leaning against the couch. Marina stayed in the kitchen, washing. Dishes leisurely, the water beating in the sink like a mantra. During the investigation, the simplest details held a power no one suspected. The woman relearned how to walk around the neighborhood without letting her body shrink. She discovered which streets had shade in the morning and which had dogs that barked excessively. She saw that the flamboyant tree in the square still stood, now larger, and that the bench where she and her sister ate popsicles had been replaced with an iron one. One day, she went into the bakery and asked for French bread with butter on the grill. The clerk, new to the neighborhood, understood nothing beyond the request. It was liberating. As she was leaving, a familiar woman, not the woman from now, but the girl from before, appeared. The woman held her hand in the air as if refusing to touch it, and said, "Welcome." She said nothing. The woman replied, "Thank you." They both wept quietly, each looking in a different direction. An important piece of life was restored when the woman found the red tin box in the closet, its star sticker peeling off. Inside were the birthday cards Lucia had written, even though she hadn't received them. Every year, on February 12th, she sat down and wrote, "To my daughter Julia, 9 years old, 10 years old, 11, and so on until 27. Cards undelivered, letters stored like seeds in winter." The woman opened them one by one, not in order. Some read like prayers, others like survival recipes. "Today I bought bread and thought of you. Your father saved a piece of wood to make a shelf in your room when you get back. Marina got into college. Your grandmother got sick, but she held my hand and said you had eyes like a river." The woman pressed the cards to her face, as if searching for a familiar scent. Lucia, a saleswoman from afar, went to the kitchen to cry, where the sink smothered her children. Raoul's investigation, slow and obstinate, found a name. It wasn't the one the neighborhood whispered about. It wasn't the man in the van, whose face everyone knew by heart, but no one had a name. It was an other, an ordinary face, an ordinary job, an address that didn't attract attention. The puzzle fell into place when an old medical record in a city 4 hours away bore a shaky signature. The surname was fake, but the date matched one of the rare memories the woman managed to retain: the time for the bandage that burned. The house no longer existed. The street had changed numbers. Still, there were old neighbors who remembered a window where light rarely shone. Justice began to move, with short, necessary steps. The press finally tired of waiting for a movie villain and went looking for another sound. They left the street alone. Time, that impossible beast, began to do its sewing. The neighborhood stopped whispering every time a woman passed. The dog at House 37 started barking at everything again. The grocery store owner once again put an extra apple on account without teary eyes. The church bell rang, and every now and then it reminded the woman's chest of something that was just sound, not threat. She learned to call Lucia Mom in suggestions at first. Then came a windy afternoon when, without thinking, she said aloud, "Mom, I bought bread." Lucia was in the backyard confusing the plants. The vocabulary permeated the house with the precise weight of things that don't need explaining. Lucia didn't run to hug. It didn't happen that time. She replied from the backyard, "That's great." And the two smiled to themselves, in different places, like someone finding their footing without looking at their feet. Marina, who had always been more action than words, invented a ritual. Every Friday, the three of them would walk to the corner of the store, return along the back street, pass in front of the school, circle the square, and sit for 5 minutes on the iron bench. They didn't talk about the past, except when he told them he wanted to talk. They talked about the price of beans, the faucet repair, a movie that had been on television. Sometimes I don't speak. The silence, which had once been monstrous, became groundless. There was also bicycle day. Marina inflated the tires with the old pump. The seat was low, adapted to a girl's body. The woman rested her hand on the handlebars with religious respect. I didn't get on. She pushed the bike down the street, slowly, like someone leading an old friend. At the end of the block, she rested her forehead on the bar and transmitted. It wasn't an epic victory. It was a human and complete gesture. It was enough. The nights, little by little, stopped being enemy territory. There were still ruined dreams, but others emerged. Dreams of gentle rain on the roof, the smell of cake, Jose's voice laughing at a silly joke from an old TV show. Lucia didn't mention him. She didn't want to pull a thread that might tear the fabric. One day, in a cafe, the woman asked, "Would he like me like that?" Lucia looked deeply and said, "He always liked you." The phrase lingered in the kitchen, putting away dishes. A year after their reunion, social worker Carla came to the house without a clipboard or a form. She only took a pot of basil. "For the window," she said. The four of them sat down, Lucia, Marina, the woman, and Carla, and ate bread and cheese. Carla said nothing. The woman didn't either. At the end, Carla said, "You did a lot." Lucia replied, "We just stayed." And that afternoon, everyone understood that sometimes staying is the bravest verb. The city didn't forget, but it learned to remember without possessing. It was no longer the girl of the moment. It was a neighbor from House 41 who enjoyed grilled bread and Friday afternoon walks. Every now and then, someone new to the neighborhood would ask why there were so many height markings on the wall of the house. Lucia replied, "Because we never stopped measuring." They laughed, and we moved on. One morning, a woman picked up a blue-covered notebook and wrote a name on the first line. Not Anna, not Julia. She wrote both. She looked at it, and I liked the weight of the letters together. Below, she wrote a short list: buy tomatoes, call Marina, water basil, call the bricklayer to fix the shelf her father wanted to build. On the last line, she wrote, "Start." That day, it rained slowly. The house smelled of coffee and clean rags. The church bell rang 6 times. The sound came through the window, rang down the hallway, reached the living room, and rested flush against her shoulder. She didn't stiffen. There were no escape routes. I just breathed. And for the first time, since stepping back through the gate, I felt something simple and precise, the present whole resting in my hands. There was no punchline to cement the story. There was no perfect poetic justice, no villain who confessed on national television, no speech of overcoming adulation with applause. There was a life. There was a mother who watered plants and dusted the bookshelf. There was a sister who bought extra bread on Saturdays. There was a woman who learned again how to cross the street without cringing. There was a wall with height markings, a basil plant in a window, a bicycle with an inflated tire leaning against the hallway. There was, above all, one sentence that now he didn't say. She was found 20 years later. Found. Not like someone finding a lost object, but like someone finding themselves without a proper name. Found and slowly staying. On that rainy afternoon, the house smelled of coffee and fresh bread. The church bell rang 6 times, as always, but for her the sound was no longer a threat nor a painful memory. It was simply the sound of where she was, in the present. She took a deep breath, leaned her forehead against the window, and let out a small, almost imperceptible, but genuine glow. Not because everything was resolved, not because the scars of the past had disappeared, but because, for the first time in 20 years, she didn't feel lost. And then, in the silence between one chime and the next, the entire neighborhood seemed to hear the same thing she did, that sometimes being found isn't about returning to where you started, but finally arriving at the point where you can stay. And so, the sentence that had for so long sounded like tragedy took on new weight. She was found 20 years later. Found not just by her family, nor by her neighborhood, but by herself.